My wife and I were house hunting when we decided to look at a house that was in a pretty busy part of town. When we arrived, we noticed that the outside was nice. The house was kind of tucked away on the property. The property itself was big with beautiful trees, but the backyard backed up to a main road, so you could hear the traffic. We were a little turned off by it from the start, but we had to drive a bit to get there, and the realtor had gone out of her way to show it to us. So we said, let's at least get out and see it. The owners had already vacated for the most part, other than staged furniture used for showing. The upstairs was unremarkable. Old carpets, outdated wallpaper, ancient kitchen. We weren't impressed, but we kept moving through, knowing we could talk down the price based on what we saw if we couldn't find anything else. After walking through the rest of the house, the last thing we had to see was the basement, which was accessible via a staircase on the opposite side of the kitchen. When I got to the top of the steps, I felt something. Wasn't quite sure, as I'm not really a sense things kind of person. My wife, however, is very open to the supernatural and paranormal, and she felt the same thing. I stood on the top step and just felt this weird feeling. The feeling is hard to describe, but it legit made me stop in place. It was a feeling I've never sensed before. It was like I was walking into a dense, invisible fog that you could feel around you. The hairs on my arms stood up, and I just felt everything in my body saying, something is not right down here. But we walked down the steps anyway. As we descended the stairs, it only got heavier as we went. When I got to the bottom of the steps and we opened the door into the basement, the feeling intensified, and it felt like I was wrapped in a heavy weighted vest and walking through sand. I looked at my wife and mouthed, "Do you feel that?" And the look on her face was of just pure dread. She was pale white, and she was obviously feeling the same thing. She stayed at the bottom of the stairs and said, "I'm going back up. I don't think we need to see anything else. Let's go," before turning around and going upstairs. The realtor wanted to keep looking, so I moved through with her, thinking we'd be quick. The realtor reached down and put a door jamb in the bottom of the door to help keep it open before we started looking around the basement. We opened a door and saw where the washer and dryer were. Another room had a full bathroom, and the sliding glass door opened out to the backyard. Then the realtor got my attention and pointed at another door. It was a flush panel heavy metal door that was painted to match the wall. We both thought maybe it was a fire safe since it had such a heavy door and there were multiple locks on the outside. These weren't ordinary locks. They were heavy-duty industrial strength locks. She said, "I'd never seen this door before," and opened it. We opened the door and the room inside was maybe 5 foot by 5 foot. It was completely made of poured concrete, but it didn't look professionally done. It looked sort of sloppy and not quite smoothed out properly, unlike what you would expect from professional work. It had 4 metal support poles in each corner of the room that were about 3 inches from the walls. They had clearly been recently painted white. The concrete floor and ceiling were painted gray, and there was a new metal drain covering what was dead center of the room. The walls, I swear to God, those walls looked like they had been filled with wall putty and looked like they were covering holes. But they weren't small hole marks. They looked like someone threw a glob on there and then smoothed it out. The patches were long and slim. The first thought I had was that they looked like scratch marks that someone attempted to cover up. I turned my attention from the walls to the poles, and you could clearly see there had been something rubbing against the poles, like the poles had been scratched themselves. The feeling I had when I was looking in that room made me sick to my stomach, like some evil demonic stuff went on in there. If I had just seen a picture of the room, I wouldn't have thought anything of it, but being there, in person, the way that room made me feel was like something was kept in there, something alive that wasn't meant to be in there. I could have easily looked at a picture, even if someone pointed things out and thought maybe it was a BDSM room for the owners, but the feeling I had was not a feeling that this room was for mutual enjoyment. I closed the door, and when it shut, I just got this overwhelming sense of panic, of fear, the kind of feeling that tells you to run, and I could feel shivers going up and down my spine. It was like something was standing right behind me, breathing down my neck. It wasn't my realtor, as she was standing next to me and still speculating that the room could have been a makeshift fire safe. But the overall feelings and impression was that it definitely was not for good intentions. We turned and started to leave when we heard what sounded like a low moan, like someone was in pain from somewhere in the basement. But there was nowhere for the noise to come from, as we could see the entire basement from where we were at, and there was no one there but us. The realtor suggested that it was the wind outside, and we started to move up the stairs. We made it to maybe the middle of the stairs, and the bottom door to the basement slammed shut behind us. It was like someone removed the door jamb and used their full force to slam the door shut. The realtor looked back at me and said, "I guess the air kicked on and forced it closed." I responded, "Yeah, that's probably it," and we made our way up the stairs. When my wife and I were leaving, we sat in the car for a moment, and I looked over at her and said, "Please tell me you felt that too." She replied, "Babe, I'm so glad you couldn't see what I saw." I asked her what she saw, and she said that the moment I got downstairs, there was a black thing, not a cloud or image, but there was just a black, transparent shadow behind me. She said the thing was huge. It completely dwarfed me from floor to ceiling in the basement, and it was as wide as two of me standing side by side. She said when she saw it, she froze, and that's why she tried to get me to go upstairs with her. It was something not friendly. She said I was afraid that thing was going to try and harm you if it could. After that whole experience, all my views on paranormal things changed. My boyfriend and I were on vacation in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, staying at an Airbnb on the St. Mary's River in Sault Ste. Marie. It was an older 3-bedroom house with its own nice private beach. We had the entire place to ourselves for the night. We started off the evening by leaving to get some food, playing Monopoly, and going swimming. Nothing out of the ordinary occurred. As soon as it got dark, we went out to smoke some weed before we ate the food we had just bought. We went back in, had our dinner, and went to the master bedroom. We were both on our phones when the light on the ceiling fan started to flick on and off. I said that the house was old and suggested we just turn the light off, but my boyfriend said no and that we should keep it on. This is when he first told me that he had a bad feeling. I figured he was just paranoid because of the weed, but I indulged him. I walked out into the hallway and into the living room to see if I could sense the energy he was feeling, and he followed me. I felt as if nothing was wrong and went back to the bedroom. He stayed in the hallway, staring at a closed bedroom door. I asked why he was staring at it, and he said, "I swear I just saw the light in that room turn on and off." I was more concerned about a person being in this house, and I said we needed to go in there and look. We walked in, checked under the bed and in the closet, and nobody was in there. He became really startled, and I was confused because I was still really high and had zoned out. He said that the dresser had just been shaken really aggressively against the wall. I was skeptical since I hadn't seen it myself, but I said I believed him, and we left the room. After we were back in the living room, he said, "I have a really bad feeling, like something bad is going to happen if we stay here. We need to get out of here." We had nowhere to go until the next day, and I didn't want to leave, but I agreed that we'd go for a drive, come back after, and get our things and leave if he still felt the same way. After we finished driving, we went back into the house, and he still had this bad feeling. I still didn't want to go, but I agreed that we'd get our things and leave. We walked into the master bedroom first, and the light switch for the ceiling fan and light was off. I remember we had left it on and said so. My boyfriend said, "This is exactly what I'm talking about. Look at the fan." It was moving slowly in a circle, and as soon as I looked up, it began moving faster, but inconsistently, as if someone was batting at it. The light began to flick on and off again as well. The switch was still off on the wall. This was enough for me to start freaking out, so we grabbed everything out of there and the master bathroom and got the heck out of that room. Next, we went to the kitchen to do our dishes since it was a requirement for checkout. My boyfriend reached into a drawer, pulled out the biggest knife in it, and turned his head to look at me. He said nothing and put the knife down and closed the drawer. I assumed he was trying to show me that it was there in case there really was another person in the house. He started visibly freaking out, and I asked what was wrong. He said, "I'll tell you in the car." We packed up, locked the house behind us, and hit the road. I asked him what he had been so afraid about, and he said, "That thing was talking to me the entire time. I think it got control of me when I was reaching for that knife, and it told me to stab you. I had to stop myself and fight it." He continued on, saying that he had been listening to these things the whole time, telling him to hit her and pick up that chair and throw it at her. Hearing this made me sick to my stomach. We ended up sleeping in my car at a rest stop, and neither of us slept well at all, with this lingering, awful feeling. Nothing has really happened to us since, so I don't think it has attached to us or anything, but I just can't fathom how it gained that much control over him in such little time. When I was an adult in my mid-20s, I was my best friend's babysitter. I would babysit her little boy, who at the time was around a year old. I wouldn't do it all the time, just for date nights when she and her husband needed a little alone time. As social workers, we are overly cautious about who we let watch our children, and as you can imagine, we've heard the worst. So my best friend really trusted me to watch after her child. One night, I was watching her son at bedtime. After playing downstairs for a bit, we go upstairs so I could give him a bath before bed. We bathe, and while drying him off, we play a quick game of peekaboo. That was when I heard movement from downstairs, and their dog started barking. It's a little yappy dog, and he barks all the time, but this time, he would not stop. I started to think that maybe my friend and her husband were just home early. A few minutes went by, and the parents still hadn't come upstairs. The dog kept barking incessantly. It just wouldn't stop. It was just going absolutely crazy. I'm still drying off the baby when I pick him up and I hear clear as day a man downstairs yell, "Stop barking at that monkey." The dog instantly stopped barking. I paused for a second because I'm thinking at first that it's my friend's husband, but no one comes upstairs. I then get this feeling that creeps up my spine, and I realize that was not my friend's husband's voice. They are not home. I start to panic because my next thought is that someone has broken into the house. I start looking for somewhere to hide the baby in the bathroom because my cell phone is downstairs and I want him to be safe. I'm so terrified that I started shaking. I then decide, screw it, I'm bringing the baby with me because I think he'll be hurt if I leave him by himself. I pick up the baby, still wrapped in a towel, and take a deep breath and start to build up the courage to run downstairs to find my phone. I open the door and I ran with that baby like I've never ran before. I grabbed my phone on the counter and then ran back upstairs. I texted my friend, who says she'll be home in 20 minutes. While waiting, I slowly searched the entire house, but I didn't find anything or anyone. My best friend and her husband came home, and I told them what happened. They both looked at each other and kind of nodded. First, they told me they call their son Monkey at bedtime. They both then proceeded to tell me how they think the house is haunted, about stuff that happens all the time. Cigar smoke smells, stuff being moved and disappearing. They'd never talked before though. I was shaken at the experience. We're still great friends to this day, but that was the last time I ever agreed to babysit.